Marcus Wellington adjusted his $1,000 tie as his black Mercedes pulled up to the palace gates. The billionaire CEO of Wellington Industries had built his empire through ruthless business deals and an iron fist. At 52, he commanded, respect through fear and money, believing that wealth made him untouchable. Today's meeting with the royal family about a massive construction contract would cement his position as the most powerful businessman in the country. The palace stood magnificent against the morning sky, its golden spires reaching toward heaven. Marcus had visited many important buildings, but this place represented something different. This was where real power lived, the kind that came from bloodlines and centuries of tradition. Yet Marcus felt no intimidation. In his mind, money talked louder than any crown. As his driver opened the door, Marcus stepped onto the cobblestone courtyard. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the ancient stones as he walked toward the main entrance. The palace guards stood at attention, their red uniforms pristine and their faces stoic. These men had protected the royal family for generations, following traditions that stretched back hundreds of years. Captain James Morrison had served as a royal guard for 15 years. He took pride in his duty, understanding that his role went beyond mere security. The guards represented the dignity and honor of the crown itself. Every morning James polished his brass buttons and ensured his uniform met the highest standards. He had protected kings and queens, princes and princesses, through countless events and ceremonies. Marcus approached the main gate where James stood guard. The protocol was simple and clear. All visitors must present proper identification and wait for escort to their appointments. No exceptions existed, regardless of wealth or status. The rules protected not just the royal family, but the sacred traditions of the monarchy itself. "Good morning," James said respectfully, extending his white-gloved hand. "May I please see your identification and appointment confirmation?" Marcus paused, his face showing the first signs of irritation. In his world, people rushed to serve him before he even asked. Restaurant managers personally seated him at the best tables. Hotel staff upgraded his rooms without request. Government officials expedited his permits and paperwork. The idea of showing identification like a common visitor struck him as absurd. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the edge that made his employees nervous. "I'm Marcus Wellington. I own half the buildings in this city." James maintained his professional demeanor, though he recognized the name. Wellington Industries had been in the news frequently, usually for aggressive business practices or labor disputes, but recognition didn't change the rules. Every person entering the palace followed the same security procedures, from janitors to foreign dignitaries. "I understand, sir," James replied calmly. "However, palace security requires all visitors to present proper identification, regardless of their position or status. It's for everyone's safety." Marcus felt his blood pressure rising. This uniformed nobody was treating him like an ordinary citizen. The CEO had grown accustomed to special treatment wherever he went. His wealth opened doors that remained closed to others. His influence made problems disappear and obstacles move aside. This guard's insistence on following rules felt like a personal insult. "Listen carefully," Marcus said, stepping closer to James. "I have a meeting with the royal family about a billion-dollar project. Your little rule book doesn't apply to people like me. Now step aside and let me through." James had encountered difficult visitors before, but something about Marcus's tone set off warning bells. The man radiated entitlement and barely controlled anger. Years of training had taught James to remain calm under pressure, to de-escalate situations before they spiraled out of control. "Sir, I appreciate your important business," James said, his voice steady and respectful. "The process will only take a moment. Once I verify your identification and appointment, I'll personally escort you to the proper entrance." Other guards began to notice the exchange. Palace security worked as a team, each member ready to support the others when situations grew tense. They had handled everything from confused tourists to actual security threats. Their training emphasized patience, professionalism, and unwavering adherence to protocol. Marcus looked around the courtyard, seeing other guards watching the interaction. In his corporate world, when he raised his voice, people scrambled to accommodate him. Board members agreed with his decisions. Employees hurried to fulfill his demands. The stock market responded to his announcements. Yet here stood this insignificant guard, unmoved by his power and influence. "You're making a serious mistake," Marcus warned, his face reddening. "I could buy and sell this entire palace. I employ more people than live in this city. My lawyers could tie up your royal family in court for decades." James recognized the escalation tactics. Wealthy individuals often tried to intimidate their way past security measures. Some threatened lawsuits, others claimed personal relationships with royalty, and a few attempted bribery. But the guard's duty remained unchanged regardless of threats or promises. "I understand your frustration, sir," James replied. "But these security measures protect everyone, including you. If you'd like to contact your appointment coordinator, they can help clarify any confusion about the entry process." The suggestion that he needed help from some palace employee pushed Marcus over the edge. His carefully constructed image of superiority couldn't tolerate this public contradiction. In boardrooms, his word was law. In business deals, opponents eventually surrendered to his demands. This guard's calm resistance felt like an attack on everything Marcus believed about his place in the world. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket not for identification, but to call his assistant and demand immediate resolution. The movement was quick and deliberate, his anger making him careless about appearances. In that moment, palace security protocols activated automatically, guards shifting position to assess potential threats while maintaining professional composure. The morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. Other visitors began arriving for their scheduled appointments, creating witnesses to what would soon become an incident that changed everything. Marcus Wellington, accustomed to having his way through money and intimidation, was about to learn that some institutions valued honor above wealth, dignity above power, and duty above personal convenience. The collision between his world of corporate dominance and the ancient traditions of royal service was inevitable, and the consequences would echo far beyond this single morning encounter. Marcus pulled out his gold-plated phone and dialed his assistant's number with aggressive finger movements. His face grew redder with each passing second as the call connected. The palace courtyard filled with the sound of his raised voice as he demanded immediate action from his staff. "Jennifer, get the palace administrator on the phone right now," Marcus barked into the device. "Some guard is giving me problems, and I want this sorted out immediately. Tell them Marcus Wellington doesn't wait for anyone." James continued standing at his post, maintaining proper posture despite the uncomfortable situation developing before him. Other guards exchanged subtle glances, recognizing the signs of an escalating confrontation. Palace security had protocols for handling aggressive visitors, but they always preferred peaceful resolution when possible. Several well-dressed visitors approached the gate area, their own appointments requiring the same security procedures. They watched with growing curiosity as the wealthy businessman continued his heated phone conversation, gesturing angrily at the patient guard. Some recognized Marcus from business magazines and news articles, making the scene even more noteworthy. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted into his phone. "I donate millions to charities, I employ thousands of people, and this nobody in a costume thinks he can disrespect me. Get someone with authority down here before I make this a legal nightmare for everyone involved." James heard every word but maintained his professional composure. Years of service had taught him that angry visitors often calmed down once they realized their outbursts wouldn't change established procedures. He had seen politicians, celebrities, and business leaders all eventually comply with security requirements after initial resistance. Marcus ended his call and turned back to James with renewed aggression. The phone conversation had only increased his frustration since his assistant couldn't immediately solve the problem. In his corporate empire, obstacles disappeared with a single phone call. Money moved mountains, influence opened doors, and his reputation preceded him everywhere. This situation felt like a personal attack on his carefully built image. "My people are calling your supervisors right now," Marcus announced loudly. "When they explain who I am and what I'm worth, you'll be looking for a new job. I've destroyed bigger careers than yours for much smaller inconveniences." James nodded respectfully while internally noting the increasing aggression. Palace security training included extensive instruction on reading body language and recognizing escalation patterns. Marcus displayed classic signs of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation, now facing a situation where his usual tactics had no effect. "Sir, I understand your position," James replied calmly. "While we wait for any clarification from administration, I'm still required to verify your identification. It's a simple process that takes less than a minute once we begin." The reasonable response only fueled Marcus's anger further. His business success had come from overwhelming opposition, through sheer force of will and financial pressure. Employees feared disappointing him, competitors avoided direct confrontation, and government officials expedited his requests. This guard's unwavering politeness felt like mockery. "Don't you dare lecture me about simple processes," Marcus snarled. "I've built a business empire while you've been playing dress-up soldier. My company's quarterly profits exceed your annual palace budget. One phone call from me could shut down every construction project in this city." Other visitors began moving away from the immediate area, sensing the volatile atmosphere developing around the gate. Palace staff members appeared at various windows and doorways drawn by the commotion. The scene was becoming a public spectacle, with Marcus Wellington's reputation being displayed for all to witness. James remained at his post, following protocols that had protected the royal family for generations. His duty extended beyond mere rule enforcement. He represented the dignity and honor of the crown itself. Personal attacks and threats couldn't shake his commitment to proper procedures, regardless of the visitor's wealth or influence. "I understand your frustration with the delay," James said, his voice remaining steady and professional. "Security procedures exist to protect everyone's safety, including yours. Once we complete the identification verification, I'll personally ensure you reach your appointment on time." Marcus interpreted the continued politeness as condescension. In boardrooms, when he raised his voice, people scrambled to accommodate him. Stock prices moved based on his public statements. Competitors adjusted their strategies around his business decisions. Yet here stood this insignificant guard, completely unmoved by displays of power and wealth. "Safety?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You think I'm some kind of security threat? I have lunch with presidents and prime ministers. My charitable foundation has donated more money than most countries' annual budgets. The only threat here is to your career when my lawyers finish with this place." The threats were becoming more specific and aggressive, causing James to subtly signal other guards through established hand gestures. Palace security worked as a coordinated team, each member ready to support the others when situations deteriorated. They maintained visual contact while appearing to focus on their individual posts. Marcus noticed the subtle communication between guards and interpreted it as further disrespect. His paranoid mind began constructing scenarios where palace staff were deliberately humiliating him, perhaps at the request of business competitors or political enemies. The idea that he might be the target of some conspiracy only increased his anger. "Now you're calling for backup?" Marcus demanded. "Against an unarmed businessman with a legitimate appointment? This is harassment, pure and simple. I'll have every one of your jobs before this day ends." James recognized that the situation was approaching a critical point. Marcus's body language showed increasing agitation, his voice growing louder with each exchange. The guard's training emphasized de-escalation techniques, but some individuals remained determined to create confrontations regardless of peaceful alternatives offered. "Sir, no one is targeting you personally," James explained patiently. "These are standard security procedures that apply to all palace visitors. If you'd prefer, we can contact your appointment coordinator to explain any confusion about the entry process." The suggestion that there might be confusion about procedures felt like another insult to Marcus's intelligence. His mind couldn't accept that his wealth and status didn't automatically exempt him from common rules. The disconnect between his self-image and reality was creating internal pressure that demanded explosive release. Marcus stepped closer to James, his face now inches from the guards. His expensive cologne mixed with the smell of anger and frustration. The physical intimidation that worked in corporate settings felt natural, a way to establish dominance when words weren't sufficient. He had no idea that this approach would trigger the most serious consequences of his entire career. The physical confrontation escalated rapidly as Marcus moved within striking distance of James, his face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck as he pointed an accusing finger at the guard's chest. The wealthy businessman had crossed a line that would change everything, but his anger prevented him from recognizing the gravity of his actions. "You listen to me very carefully," Marcus hissed, his voice low and threatening. "I didn't become a billionaire by accepting disrespect from servants. You're going to step aside right now, or I'll make sure you regret this moment for the rest of your pathetic life." James maintained his position and composure, but his training kicked into high alert mode. Physical intimidation of royal guards constituted a serious offense, potentially leading to arrest and prosecution. The guards' primary responsibility was protecting the royal family and palace grounds, which meant neutralizing any threats through appropriate force if necessary. "Sir, I need you to step back and lower your voice," James said firmly, his tone shifting from polite to authoritative. "Threatening palace security is a criminal offense. Please return to a respectful distance so we can resolve this situation peacefully." Marcus interpreted the firmer response as escalation rather than professional boundary setting. His corporate mindset couldn't process that his wealth and influence had no power in this environment. The idea that some uniformed nobody could give him orders felt like a fundamental violation of the natural order he believed governed the world. "Criminal offense?" Marcus laughed harshly. "I'll show you what a real offense looks like. My lawyers will bury this entire palace in lawsuits. I'll sue you personally for harassment, discrimination, and whatever else my legal team can invent. You have no idea who you're messing with." Other palace visitors had cleared the immediate area, but many continued watching from safe distances. Some began recording the confrontation with their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus Wellington, one of the country's most powerful businessmen, was publicly melting down at the palace gates. James could see other guards moving into support positions around the courtyard perimeter. Palace security protocols were activating automatically as the situation deteriorated beyond normal visitor management procedures. The threat assessment had elevated from routine difficulty to potential security incident requiring coordinated response. "Mr. Wellington," James said, using the businessman's name to personalize the interaction and potentially defuse tensions. "I recognize your importance and understand your frustration. However, threatening palace personnel crosses legal boundaries that I'm obligated to enforce. Please step back and allow us to contact your appointment coordinator." The use of his name only convinced Marcus that this was a planned humiliation. In his paranoid state, he believed the guard had been briefed about his visit and instructed to cause problems. Business competitors had tried various tactics to damage his reputation before, and this felt like another coordinated attack on his standing. "Don't you dare use my name like we're friends," Marcus snarled. "You're nothing but hired help in a fancy costume. I own buildings taller than this palace. I employ more people than live in this city, and I won't be lectured by some government employee who couldn't afford my shoes." James realized that rational discussion had become impossible. Marcus had entered a state of rage where logic and consequences held no meaning. The guard's experience with difficult situations told him that physical confrontation might be imminent unless immediate de-escalation measures succeeded. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one final time to step back and calm down," James stated clearly. "If you continue threatening behavior or make physical contact, I'll be forced to detain you under palace security authority. This is your last warning before legal consequences begin." Marcus heard the warning but interpreted it as another empty threat. His entire career had been built on calling bluffs and pushing through opposition. Government officials had threatened him before, but money and lawyers always resolved problems in his favor. This guard was probably bluffing too, trying to intimidate him into compliance through hollow warnings. Legal consequences? Marcus stepped even closer, his chest almost touching James's uniform. "You want to see consequences? I'll show you what happens when nobodies try to disrespect their betters. This palace will regret the day they hired you." The final escalation came when Marcus raised his hand and jabbed his finger hard into James's chest, punctuating his words with physical contact. The action crossed every line that palace security protocols were designed to protect. No visitor, regardless of wealth or status, could physically assault royal guards without facing immediate consequences. James reacted with trained precision, grabbing Marcus's wrist and securing it in a control hold that prevented further aggressive movement. The guard's response was measured and professional, using only the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat while avoiding unnecessary injury to the businessman. "Sir, you are now under arrest for assault on a royal guard," James announced clearly. "You have the right to remain silent and the right to legal representation. Any further resistance will result in additional charges." Marcus couldn't believe what was happening. His mind struggled to process that some uniformed employee was actually arresting him. Marcus Wellington, one of the most powerful men in the country. The physical restraint felt impossible, like reality itself had malfunctioned. "Are you insane?" Marcus screamed, his voice echoing across the palace courtyard. "You can't arrest me. Do you have any idea what this will cost you? I'll destroy your life, your family, your entire future. Let me go right now." Other guards moved in to assist James, forming a protective circle around the detained businessman. Palace security operated under clear protocols that protected both staff and visitors during arrest situations. They had successfully handled everything from pickpockets to potential terrorists, but arresting a billionaire CEO presented unique challenges. "This is a mistake," Marcus continued shouting as additional restraints were applied. "I'm Marcus Wellington. I have meetings with the royal family. You're all going to lose your jobs when my lawyers finish with this place." The arrest had been witnessed by dozens of people, many of whom were recording the entire incident on their phones. Within hours, footage of Marcus Wellington being detained at the palace gates would spread across social media platforms, news websites, and television broadcasts. The public humiliation was just beginning, but Marcus was too angry to recognize the full scope of consequences heading his way. Within minutes of Marcus's arrest, palace guards escorted him to a secure holding area inside the palace grounds. The businessman continued protesting loudly, his voice echoing through ancient stone corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. His expensive suit was wrinkled from the restraint process, and his carefully styled hair had become disheveled during the struggle. "This is kidnapping," Marcus shouted as guards led him through ornate hallways lined with portraits of past monarchs. "I'm a legitimate visitor with an appointment. You people have no authority to detain me like some common criminal." James followed the arrest procession, completing required paperwork on a digital tablet while walking. Palace security maintained detailed records of all incidents, especially those involving assault charges against royal guards. The documentation would be crucial for legal proceedings and internal review processes. The holding area was a small but dignified room designed for temporary detention of palace visitors who violated security protocols. Unlike a police station cell, it contained comfortable seating and maintained the palace's standards of dignity, even for difficult situations. Guards positioned themselves outside while Marcus paced angrily inside, continuing his protests. Meanwhile, news of the incident was spreading rapidly through both official and unofficial channels. Palace staff members began making necessary notifications to supervisors, legal departments, and royal family security coordinators. An incident involving a prominent businessman required careful handling to protect both institutional reputation and legal interests. Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, received an emergency call from Palace administration about 30 minutes after the arrest. The conversation was brief and professional, informing Wellington Industries that their CEO had been detained for assaulting a royal guard and would not be attending his scheduled meeting with the royal family. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Jennifer asked, certain she had misunderstood. "Mr. Wellington was arrested for what?" "Assault on palace security personnel," the palace administrator confirmed. "The incident occurred at the main gate during standard security procedures. Mr. Wellington is currently being held pending legal review of the charges." Jennifer immediately contacted the company's legal department while simultaneously trying to reach Marcus's personal attorney. The assistant had worked for demanding executives before, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this type of emergency. Her boss, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, was sitting in palace detention like a common troublemaker. Back in the holding room, Marcus continued his angry tirade to anyone within hearing distance. His business mind was already calculating the damage to his reputation and developing strategies to minimize negative consequences. However, his analysis was based on the assumption that money and influence could still solve this problem. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge here," Marcus demanded when a palace administrator entered the room. "This entire situation is a misunderstanding that can be resolved with one phone call to the right person." The administrator, a dignified woman named Margaret Hayes who had worked at the palace for over 20 years. Maintained professional composure while addressing the detained businessman. She had handled difficult situations before, but few involved individuals of Marcus's public prominence. "Mr. Wellington, I understand your frustration," Margaret began calmly. "However, assault on royal guards is a serious criminal matter that cannot be resolved through administrative channels. The legal system must now handle your case according to established procedures." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. The idea that his situation couldn't be fixed through normal business channels felt impossible. Throughout his career, every problem had eventually yielded to the right combination of money, influence, and legal pressure. This woman's calm insistence on following procedures seemed like another coordinated insult. "Do you understand who you're dealing with?" Marcus asked, his voice shifting to the tone he used during hostile business negotiations. "Wellington Industries employs 15,000 people. My charitable foundation has donated hundreds of millions to worthy causes. I have personal relationships with government officials at every level." Margaret had encountered this type of response before from wealthy individuals who couldn't accept that their status didn't exempt them from consequences. Palace protocols were designed to treat everyone equally, regardless of their wealth, fame, or political connections. The institution's integrity depended on consistent application of rules and procedures. "I'm aware of your business accomplishments, Mr. Wellington," Margaret replied respectfully. "However, those achievements don't change the fact that you physically assaulted a royal guard in the course of his duties. The law applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their social or economic position." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus's personal attorney, David Richardson, who had rushed to the palace as soon as Jennifer contacted him. David was an experienced lawyer who specialized in corporate legal issues and crisis management for high-profile clients. However, criminal assault charges represented unfamiliar territory. "Marcus, what the hell happened here?" David asked as he was escorted into the holding area. "Jennifer said something about you being arrested for assault, but that can't be right." Marcus felt relief at seeing his lawyer, convinced that professional legal intervention would quickly resolve the situation. David had successfully handled numerous crises over the years, from securities investigations to employee lawsuits. This incident felt similar to other problems that had been quietly settled through negotiation and financial agreements. "It's a complete setup, David," Marcus explained rapidly. "Some guard was deliberately giving me problems, probably on orders from business competitors. When I tried to reason with him, he fabricated assault charges to embarrass me publicly. This whole thing is a coordinated attack on my reputation." David listened to Marcus's version of events while mentally preparing for what promised to be a complex legal challenge. His client's explanation sounded paranoid and self-serving, but wealthy individuals often developed conspiracy theories when facing consequences for their actions. The lawyer needed to assess the actual evidence before developing a defense strategy. "Let me speak with palace legal representatives and review what evidence they have," David told Marcus. "Don't say anything else to anyone until I understand the full situation. Criminal charges are serious business, especially when they involve assaulting government personnel." Marcus watched his lawyer leave to gather information, still confident that money and legal expertise would eventually resolve everything in his favor. He had no idea that multiple witnesses had recorded his entire confrontation with James, creating undeniable evidence of his aggressive behavior and physical assault. The social media storm was already beginning, and his reputation was about to face the greatest crisis of his career. While Marcus sat in palace detention, the outside world was experiencing the first waves of what would become a massive public relations disaster. Multiple witnesses had recorded different angles of his confrontation with James, and the footage was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. The hashtag CEO arrest began trending within 2 hours of the incident. Sarah Chen, a university journalism student who had been visiting the palace with her class, posted the clearest video of Marcus's aggressive behavior and subsequent arrest. Her footage showed the entire escalation, from his initial demands for special treatment to the moment he physically struck the guard. The video quickly gained thousands of views and shares. "Can't believe I just witnessed this," Sarah wrote in her post. "Rich businessman thinks he's above basic security rules, gets aggressive with palace guard, then gets arrested like anyone else would. Money doesn't buy you the right to assault people doing their jobs." News organizations picked up the story within hours, with reporters scrambling to verify details and gather additional footage. Marcus Wellington's name recognition made the incident particularly newsworthy, especially given his reputation for aggressive business tactics and controversial public statements. The palace assault added a dramatic new chapter to his already polarizing public image. Television news programs began running the story during their evening broadcasts, with anchors describing how one of the country's wealthiest businessmen had been arrested for assaulting a royal guard. The footage of Marcus being restrained and escorted away played repeatedly, creating a powerful visual narrative about entitled behavior and consequences. Back at Wellington Industries headquarters, emergency meetings were convening as news of Marcus's arrest reached employees and board members. Jennifer had briefed the executive team about the incident, but many still struggled to believe that their CEO had actually been detained for criminal assault. The company's stock price began declining as investors reacted to the negative publicity. Board member Victoria Thompson called an emergency session to discuss crisis management strategies. As one of Marcus's longtime business associates, she understood his volatile personality, but had never expected it to result in criminal charges. The board needed to protect the company's interests while their CEO faced potential prosecution. "We need to control this narrative immediately," Victoria announced to the assembled executives. "Our stock price is already dropping, and this story is going viral on social media. If we don't respond properly, this could damage our business relationships and ongoing projects." Meanwhile, Marcus's lawyer David Richardson was meeting with palace legal representatives to understand the full scope of charges his client faced. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming, including multiple video recordings, witness statements, and testimony from royal guards who had observed the entire incident. "Your client physically struck a royal guard in the course of his official duties," explained Palace legal counsel Amanda Foster. "That constitutes assault under criminal law, regardless of any perceived provocation or misunderstanding about security procedures." David reviewed the witness statements and video evidence, realizing that Marcus's situation was far worse than initially apparent. The footage clearly showed unprovoked aggression, threats, and culminating physical assault. No amount of legal maneuvering could change the basic facts of what had occurred. "What are you looking for in terms of resolution?" David asked, hoping to negotiate some form of plea agreement that might minimize publicity and legal consequences for his client. Amanda shook her head firmly. "This isn't a civil matter that can be settled through negotiation. Criminal assault charges must be processed through the court system. Your client will need to appear before a magistrate for formal charging and bail consideration." The news hit David like a physical blow. Criminal proceedings meant public court appearances, media coverage, and permanent legal records that couldn't be hidden or sealed. Marcus's reputation would suffer irreparable damage regardless of the final verdict. The lawyer returned to inform his client about the grim legal reality they faced. "Marcus, we have a serious problem," David said as he rejoined his client in the holding area. "The evidence against you is overwhelming, and Palace Legal won't consider any settlement negotiations. You're going to be formally charged with criminal assault." Marcus felt the first real fear since his arrest began. The idea that he might actually face prosecution, court appearances, and potential conviction seemed impossible. His wealth and influence had always protected him from serious consequences, creating a bubble of immunity that was now bursting dramatically. "That's impossible," Marcus protested. "I barely touched the guy. It was hardly even contact, just pointing to emphasize my words. You can't seriously tell me that constitutes assault worthy of criminal prosecution." David showed Marcus some of the video footage that witnesses had captured, forcing the businessman to confront the reality of his actions. The recordings clearly showed aggressive behavior, threats, and deliberate physical contact with the guard. No jury would view such evidence favorably, especially given Marcus's obvious wealth and privilege. "The video doesn't lie, Marcus," David said grimly. "You can be seen jabbing the guard in the chest while making threats. That's textbook assault, and the fact that he's a royal guard makes it even more serious. We're looking at potential jail time, heavy fines, and permanent criminal record." As evening approached, news of Marcus's arrest had become the lead story on every major news outlet. Television reporters stood outside Wellington Industries headquarters in the palace gates, describing the dramatic incident and its potential consequences. Social media discussions grew increasingly heated as people debated wealth, privilege, and accountability. The royal family released a brief statement through their press office, expressing confidence in their security personnel and stating that they would cooperate fully with legal proceedings. The measured response only emphasized the seriousness of the situation and the institution's commitment to treating the matter through proper legal channels. Marcus spent his first night in palace detention, unable to sleep as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. His aggressive confrontation with a royal guard had triggered consequences that money couldn't fix, lawyers couldn't negotiate away, and influence couldn't minimize. The empire he had built through intimidation and force was about to crumble under the weight of his own actions. Outside, the world was watching and waiting to see how justice would handle one of the country's most powerful men when he finally faced consequences for treating others as beneath his consideration. The next morning brought Marcus's first appearance before Magistrate Eleanor Watson, a respected judge known for her fair but firm approach to criminal justice. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious citizens, and legal observers eager to witness how the justice system would handle one of the country's most powerful businessmen. Camera crews waited outside since photography wasn't permitted during proceedings. Marcus arrived at court wearing a fresh suit that his lawyer had arranged, but his appearance couldn't hide the stress and exhaustion from his night in detention. The businessman who had commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors now sat quietly at the defendant's table, surrounded by the formal atmosphere of legal proceedings that his wealth couldn't control. "Mr. Wellington," Magistrate Watson began, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, "you are charged with assault on a royal guard in the course of his official duties. This is a serious criminal offense that carries significant penalties. Do you understand the charges against you?" Marcus's lawyer had coached him to respond simply and avoid any statements that might worsen his situation. The businessman struggled with the unfamiliar experience of being addressed as a defendant rather than a powerful figure demanding special treatment. His usual confidence had been replaced by nervous uncertainty. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand," Marcus replied, his voice lacking its normal commanding tone. The prosecutor presented the evidence against Marcus, including witness statements, video footage from multiple angles, and testimony from palace guards who had observed the incident. The recordings were particularly damaging, showing clear progression from verbal threats to physical assault without any provocation from the royal guard. "Your Honor," the prosecutor explained, "the evidence shows deliberate escalation of aggressive behavior, culminating in physical assault on palace security personnel. Mr. Wellington's wealth and social position do not exempt him from the same laws that protect all citizens from assault and intimidation." David Richardson attempted to minimize the charges by arguing that his client had been frustrated by bureaucratic procedures and had made a minor gesture that was misinterpreted as assault. However, the video evidence contradicted any claims of misunderstanding or accidental contact. "My client is a respected businessman who has contributed significantly to the community through his charitable work and job creation," David argued. "This incident represents an unfortunate moment of frustration rather than criminal intent. We request consideration of his character and contributions to society." Magistrate Watson reviewed the evidence carefully before addressing the courtroom. Her experience had taught her that wealth and social status often created different standards of behavior, but the law required equal treatment regardless of personal circumstances. The severity of assaulting government personnel demanded appropriate consequences. "Mr. Wellington," the magistrate said, "the evidence clearly shows deliberate assault on a royal guard performing his lawful duties. Your social position and business success do not justify or excuse criminal behavior toward public servants. I am setting bail at £100,000, with conditions that you surrender your passport and avoid any contact with palace personnel." The bail amount shocked Marcus, not because of the money involved, but because it represented the court's serious view of his actions. He had expected his lawyer to negotiate a simple resolution, perhaps community service or a fine that would quietly resolve the matter. Instead, he faced formal prosecution and potential imprisonment. News of the court appearance spread rapidly through traditional and social media channels. The image of Marcus Wellington standing before a magistrate as a criminal defendant created a powerful symbol about accountability and justice. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for prosecuting, the wealthy businessman despite his social status. Wellington Industries faced immediate consequences as news of their CEO's criminal charges spread through business networks. Several major contracts were put on hold pending resolution of Marcus's legal situation. Partner companies began distancing themselves from the scandal, concerned about association with criminal behavior and negative publicity. Board member Victoria Thompson called another emergency meeting as the company's stock price continued declining. Investors were clearly spooked by the ongoing legal drama and its potential impact on business operations. The board needed to consider temporary leadership changes to protect shareholder interests. "We have to face reality," Victoria announced to her fellow board members. "Marcus is facing serious criminal charges that could result in imprisonment. We need interim leadership to maintain business continuity and restore investor confidence in our operations." Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his mansion under strict bail conditions. But the luxury of his surroundings couldn't ease the psychological pressure he was experiencing. His world of privilege and special treatment had collapsed overnight, replaced by legal constraints and public scrutiny that money couldn't eliminate. The businessman spent hours on the phone with his lawyer, searching for strategies to minimize the legal consequences of his actions. However, David Richardson was increasingly pessimistic about their options given the overwhelming evidence and public attention surrounding the case. "Marcus, we need to seriously consider a guilty plea," David advised during one of their lengthy conversations. "The evidence against you is ironclad, and going to trial would only generate more negative publicity. A plea agreement might result in lighter sentencing and quicker resolution." The suggestion of pleading guilty felt like ultimate defeat to Marcus. His entire identity was built around winning, dominating, and never accepting blame for problems. The idea of publicly admitting criminal behavior contradicted everything he believed about his superior position in society. Social media discussions about the case intensified as more details emerged about Marcus's history of aggressive business practices and employee complaints. Former workers began sharing stories about his intimidating behavior and threats toward staff members who had challenged his decisions. The Palace incident appeared to be part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated mistake. James Morrison, the royal guard who had been assaulted, received messages of support from colleagues and citizens who appreciated his professional handling of the difficult situation. His calm adherence to protocol despite threats and intimidation had protected both palace security and institutional dignity. As the week progressed, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling under the weight of consequences he had never expected to face. The man who had believed himself untouchable was discovering that actions carried prices that even vast wealth couldn't pay. 3 months after his arrest, Marcus Wellington stood once again before Magistrate Watson for his sentencing hearing. The courtroom was even more crowded than during his initial appearance, with media representatives from around the world covering what had become a landmark case about wealth, privilege, and accountability. His once commanding presence had been reduced to that of a humbled defendant awaiting judgment. The interim period had been devastating for both Marcus personally and his business empire. Wellington Industries had lost several major contracts, with clients citing concerns about their association with criminal behavior and negative publicity. The company's stock price had fallen by 40%, wiping out billions in market value and investor confidence. Marcus had eventually accepted his lawyer's advice to enter a guilty plea, hoping to minimize his sentence and begin the long process of rebuilding his reputation. However, the judge had made it clear that wealth and social status would not influence her sentencing decision. The law demanded equal treatment regardless of personal circumstances. "Mr. Wellington," Magistrate Watson began, "you have pleaded guilty to assault on a royal guard in the course of his official duties. This court has reviewed your background, the circumstances of your offense, and the impact of your actions on both the victim and public confidence in our institutions." James Morrison had provided a victim impact statement describing how the assault had affected him personally and professionally. Despite his training and experience being physically attacked while performing, his duties had been traumatic and had reinforced the importance of proper security protocols for protecting all palace personnel. "Your actions demonstrated a fundamental disrespect for the rule of law and the people who serve our institutions," the magistrate continued. "The evidence shows deliberate escalation from verbal threats to physical assault, motivated by your belief that wealth exempted you from normal social conventions. Marcus listened silently as his character and actions were dissected before the crowded courtroom. The public humiliation was more devastating than any financial loss he had ever experienced. His reputation as a powerful businessman had been replaced by infamy as someone who had assaulted a public servant. However, Magistrate Watson said, "This court also recognizes your eventual acceptance of responsibility through your guilty plea and your lack of prior criminal history. Your charitable contributions and employment of thousands of workers demonstrate capacity for positive social impact when properly channeled." The judge sentenced Marcus to 6 months in prison, with the possibility of serving half the sentence under house arrest if he completed anger management counseling and performed 500 hours of community service. Additionally, he was fined £50,000 and required to write a formal apology to James Morrison and palace security personnel. The sentence sent shockwaves through both the business community and general public. Many wealthy individuals had expected Marcus to escape serious consequences through legal maneuvering and political influence. Instead, he faced actual imprisonment like any other citizen convicted of assault. Marcus's brief statement to the court was a carefully crafted apology written by his legal team, but observers noted that it lacked the genuine remorse that might have influenced sentencing. His lawyer had advised against any spontaneous remarks that might worsen his situation or create additional legal complications. "I accept responsibility for my actions and deeply regret the harm I caused to Mr. Morrison and the institution he serves with honor," Marcus read from his prepared statement. "I understand that my behavior was unacceptable regardless of any frustration I was experiencing at the time." Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced a wall of reporters and cameras as he left for his first night in prison. The man who had once commanded media attention through business, announcements, and charitable donations now found himself at the center of a criminal justice story that would define his legacy. Wellington Industries Board had already begun the process of replacing Marcus as CEO, recognizing that his criminal conviction and imprisonment made continued leadership impossible. Victoria Thompson was appointed as interim chief executive while the company searched for permanent replacement leadership to rebuild their damaged reputation. "We are committed to moving forward as a responsible corporate citizen," Victoria announced during a press conference. "While we respect the legal process and Mr. Wellington's right to appeal, our company must focus on serving our employees, customers, and shareholders with integrity and professionalism." The prison experience was unlike anything Marcus had ever encountered. The wealthy businessman who had lived in luxury mansions and 5-star hotels now shared cramped quarters with common criminals from all walks of life. The complete loss of privilege and special treatment forced him to confront the reality of how ordinary people lived and struggled. James Morrison received widespread recognition for his professional handling of the incident, with palace administration commending his adherence to protocol under difficult circumstances. The guard's calm response had protected institutional dignity while ensuring that justice was served regardless of the perpetrator's wealth and influence. Social media discussions about the case evolved from initial outrage to broader conversations about inequality, privilege, and accountability in society. Marcus's downfall became a symbol of what could happen when wealthy individuals face the same consequences as everyone else for their actions. After serving 3 months in prison and 3 months under house arrest, Marcus emerged from the justice system as a changed man. The experience had stripped away his arrogance and forced him to confront the impact of his behavior on others. His business empire was largely gone, his reputation was destroyed, but he had gained something more valuable than wealth. The man who had once believed himself above the law now understood that true power came from treating others with respect and dignity. Marcus began working with organizations that helped former prisoners reintegrate into society, using his experience to demonstrate that accountability and redemption were possible for anyone willing to change. The palace guard, who had refused to be intimidated by wealth and threats, had upheld principles that protected everyone's dignity and safety. James Morrison continued his service with quiet pride, knowing that his actions had reinforced the fundamental truth that justice must apply equally to all citizens, regardless of their bank accounts or social status.